Discover the grim truth of Guantanamo Bay Prison, Cuba, one of the world's most notorious and contentious facilities, through this documentary that gives a detailed account of prisoners and military personnel's experiences, ranging from strict routines and restrictions, claims of human rights breaches, and psychological impact of long-term detention. Join us as we go on this incredible adventure. Guantanamo Bay, established by the U.S. military on Cuba's eastern coast and open for detainees suspected of supporting terrorist acts following 9/11 attacks, has generated much debate ever since its opening due to allegations of human rights breaches and imprisonment of convicts without charges or trial being filed against them. Guantanamo Bay became part of American history during the Spanish-American War when, following a lease arrangement between Cuba and the U.S., they established a naval facility there as part of a lease agreement between Cuba government and U.S. forces during a lease arrangement of Guantanamo Bay in 1903. For decades following this eventful history lesson was used as a military staging area and training center by U.S. troops throughout their history, especially during 1962 during Cuba Missile Crisis. Following the 9/11 attacks, America declared war against terrorism and approved imprisonment of those considered terrorists by President George Bush's administration. Due to Guantanamo Bay's location outside the country and status as an American military installation, Guantanamo Bay has become home for inmates shortly afterwards and quickly gained notoriety for its contentious confinement practices, including its controversial enhanced interrogation techniques, widely considered torture techniques by many people. Through the years, Guantanamo Bay's inmate population has fluctuated, reaching an all-time high of more than 700 in 2003 and plunging as low as under 40 today. Human rights organizations and international bodies alike have denounced Guantanamo's imprisonment of prisoners without charging or trial of allegations of abuse as well as its surrounding circumstances, this action being strongly denounced. Guantanamo Bay's prisoner treatment practices and detainee retention procedures have long been controversial since their creation. Detention without accusation or trial, in violation of both international law and basic notions of justice, remains one of the major points of contention between those holding detainees there, who lack access to an attorney, and those held there, many having spent years behind bars without ever facing charges, with some even finding eligibility for release but remained in prison there. Guantanamo Bay remains controversial due to the use of enhanced interrogation techniques like waterboarding, sleep deprivation, and extended isolation, often considered forms of torture by many individuals and human rights organizations around the world. These measures have received much condemnation. Guantanamo Bay detainee treatment has also generated much discourse, as accusations have surfaced of cruel treatment and exposure to high temperatures as well as sensory deprivation. Guantanamo Bay prisoners live under a strict set of regulations that determine every aspect of their daily lives, depending on perceived threat levels and privilege levels granted based on these restrictions and allowances, impacting daily routines in an impactful fashion. Prisoners spend up to 22 hours each day locked inside cramped quarters without exercise or entertainment opportunities, frequently searched cells, controlled communications with outside world, and under surveillance as well as limited opportunities for interaction among fellow inmates, with English being their sole language allowed for communication purposes. 3 meals are usually provided daily to convicts in prison, typically consisting of bland and nutritious food that meets nutritional needs. Muslim prisoners receive halal cuisine, while vegetarian and vegan choices may also be provided. Prisoners only have limited access to religious leaders and spiritual support. They may take part in collective prayer services and receive religious materials as needed. Military doctors offer medical care supervised by jail officials. Since Guantanamo Bay Prison opened, allegations and discussions concerning human rights breaches and how prisoners are treated at Guantanamo have persisted. Detainees have reported being subject to various forms of mistreatment at this prison, including prolonged isolation, humiliation, physical torture, and sexual exploitation. Guantanamo Bay prisoners who wish to avoid hunger strikes have also been required to consume meals by being forced through tubes inserted in their noses and stomachs. This practice has received criticism as cruel and a breach of medical ethics. Human rights groups and international civil society have repeatedly voiced concern regarding Guantanamo Bay's prison treatment of detainees since its opening. There have been repeated demands that this facility close, ending any mistreatment inmates may experience at its hands. Guantanamo Bay interrogation methods and their effects on detainees have drawn significant condemnation, sparking strong condemnations by human rights organizations worldwide. There have been allegations that interrogation techniques used against detainees at Guantanamo Bay led to long-term psychological distress among detainees, such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicide. Reports indicate the interrogation methods have caused permanent psychological injury for numerous people held there. Guantanamo Bay inmates have also been denied due process, with some remaining in detention without ever being charged or tried and suffering the physical and psychological impacts of interrogation techniques used on them. Some have even claimed that this indefinite detention, along with the lack of openness and accountability during interrogations, violate fundamental human rights. Guantanamo Bay detainees have suffered psychologically from long-term imprisonment. Many inmates have been housed there for multiple years without facing charges or facing courtroom hearings. Others were even detained without formal legal proceedings being instituted against them. Long-term imprisonment has been proven to have detrimental psychological repercussions, compounded by conditions in confinement such as a lack of natural lighting, fresh air, or interaction with the outside world. Furthermore, isolation and solitary confinement increase suicide risk significantly. Guantanamo Bay inmates have reported experiencing psychological torture, such as humiliation, lack of sleep, or other forms of psychological strain. Such tactics have drawn widespread condemnation as cruel and against international law. Guantanamo Bay military staff members are in charge of overseeing daily prison operations, which include managing prisoners' living conditions. Furthermore, employees at Guantanamo are charged with questioning and interrogating inmates, something which has caused controversy and widespread debate among various stakeholders. Military troops at Guantanamo Bay may experience considerable psychological stress as a result of working there, according to reports. Military personnel working there could experience psychological trauma as they witness inmates being mistreated, as well as the use of torture methods and other cruel measures used against inmates at this institution, according to media accounts. Guantanamo Bay military personnel have expressed conflicted emotions regarding their roles within the prison, with some individuals believing their duties do not uphold principles of justice and human rights. According to reports, many military employees struggle with moral and ethical implications associated with working at Guantanamo Bay that cause significant stress, anxiety, and mental health problems for themselves as employees. Guantanamo Bay has garnered generally negative reactions and perceptions in the international community, drawing widespread condemnation of both its facilities and procedures from government, human rights organizations, and members of the international society alike. Nations worldwide have repeatedly called for the closure of this facility and raised serious issues about lack of transparency and due process regarding detentions and interrogations of captives at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. They've demanded that the U.S. adhere to international human rights norms after widespread criticism about torture techniques used at this facility. Human rights groups such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have voiced strong condemnations of Guantanamo Bay. Concerns have persisted regarding protracted detention arrangements, as well as lack of accountability. Guantanamo Bay has long been at the center of controversy and criticism, prompting numerous calls for its closure and replacement with alternative facilities for holding those suspected of supporting terrorist activity. These alternatives to Guantanamo include America's legal system and penitentiary systems. One proposal would be for terrorist suspects to be detained within the criminal justice system in America, rather than the military prison facilities. This would reduce human rights breaches while giving detainees legal protection provided by courts here. Transfer to other nations. Another proposed option would involve moving detainees to other nations who can accept them, with diplomatic measures taken in order to establish agreements among nations accepting detainees, without human rights abuses occurring during or following the transfer. Increased monitoring and surveillance. Some have proposed that rather than detaining individuals without charge or trial, the United States should focus its surveillance measures more strictly to reduce terrorist attacks. Guantanamo Bay remains an issue that continues to spark contention and debate due to ongoing concerns over detainees' treatment and potential violations of fundamental human rights. Calls for its closure underscore this necessity, along with stricter compliance with legal and human rights norms when holding suspects in terrorist attacks. This video has come to an end. See you in the next one.